faithfully delivering value, exploring great books worldwide. Hi, this is Sally here to talk books. Today, I'm going to interpret the book Old Goriot for you. Its author is the renowned French writer Balzac. He once had this grand vision to create a vast collection of novels that are both standalone and interconnected, capturing the essence of life and society in 19th century France as capitalism was on the rise. Mm. He named this series The Human Comedy and poured his heart and soul into it. Even though he didn't finish it all, he published 91 novels in his lifetime, creating over 2,000 vivid characters, earning it the title of the Encyclopedia of Capitalist Society. Today's book, Old Goriot, serves as the prologue to The Human Comedy. Many of the unique characters from the series first appear in Old Goriot. What's more important is that Old Goriot tackles one of Balzac's signature themes, money. The story is set in 1830s Paris, where the Seine River splits the city into left and right banks. The left bank was home to the working class, while the right bank was where the nobles and capitalists lived. On the bleak streets of the left bank, there's a 4-story apartment building. Since it's owned by a widow named Madame Vautrin, folks call it the Vautrin boarding house. The Vautrin boarding house is built of rough stone, has worn-out furniture, damp rooms, and a nasty smell. The paint in the dining room is chipped and faded. Balzac described it as showing a poverty that's utterly unpoetic. In this rundown place, money rules supreme, and Madame Vautrin only has eyes for cash. She strictly ranks the tenants by how much rent they pay, deciding how much care and respect each deserves. The ladies on the second floor pay 150 francs a month. Madame Vautrin gives them the best rooms and dotes on them. The middle-aged businessman on the third floor, Vautrin, pays 72 francs a month. He has to butter up Madame Vautrin to stay out of trouble. The young student on the fourth floor, Rastignac, pays just 45 francs a month. Madame Vautrin isn't keen on tenants like him, grumbling that they gobble up too much bread at breakfast. 150, 72, 45. These cold, hard numbers precisely determine each person's relationships and status in the Vautrin boarding house. Balzac called this place a den of demons, and the demon king ruling it all is money. Among the tenants of the Vautrin boarding house, the most dramatic character is Goriot, also known as Old Goriot. When he first moved in, he paid 100 francs a month to Madame Vautrin. Seeing that he was wealthy, Madame Vautrin gave up her own room for him, and even dolled herself up to try to seduce him. Some said that Mr. Goriot was a perfect gentleman. After some time, it seemed like Goriot suddenly didn't have as much money anymore. He proposed moving to the third floor, reducing the rent to 75 francs, and Madame Vautrin turned on him faster than you can flip a page. She started calling him Old Goriot without any respect. In French, old man is a somewhat disrespectful term. Later, Old Goriot was demoted again, moving to the fourth floor with a monthly rent of just 45 francs. At this point, everyone in the boarding house started looking down on him, mocking him all day long, and even making up rumors to slander him. Because Old Goriot had received a few young, wealthy female visitors at the boarding house, everyone said he was spending all his money on women. Old Goriot explained that the female visitors were his 2 daughters. But no one believed his explanation. After all, if his daughters were so wealthy, why would their father live on the 4th floor of the Vautrin boarding house? And I think, in just 2 years, Old Goriot moved from the 2nd floor to the 4th floor, going from a rich man to a poor one. For a long time, no one knew the reason behind this, making it a big mystery in the Vautrin boarding house. The one who finally unraveled this mystery was the young student living next door to Old Goriot, Rastignac. Although he was a poor student at the bottom in the boarding house, he had a distant relative who was a well-known noble lady in Paris. Mm. So he bypassed the money-based hierarchy in the boarding house, becoming the only tenant who had the chance to step onto the right bank of the Seine and mingle in high society. Rastignac was handsome and dashing in appearance, but he was also an ambitious young man full of desires. He originally intended to study law hard and become a lawyer, but the path of study was too hard and too long. He couldn't wait. So he mustered up the courage to visit his distant relative, Madame de Beauseant, hoping to find a shortcut through connections, to quickly rise in Paris and enjoy the life of the upper class. Fortunately, Madame de Beauseant took a liking to Rastignac and warmly received him. In their chat, Rastignac learned that old Goriot indeed had two daughters, the eldest married to a nobleman and the younger to a banker. Old Goriot came from humble beginnings. Originally, he was just a flour miller, but during wartime chaos, he seized a business opportunity, bought a bakery, and made a fortune. The sons-in-law only pursued old Goriot's daughters because they were after his wealth. To ensure his daughters' lives after marriage, he retired early, sold his shop, and split most of his savings into two dowries for them. After getting the dowries, the sons-in-law scorned old Goriot's low status, refusing to host or acknowledge him. So old Goriot had to move to the Vautrin boarding house and live alone. After marrying, the daughters got used to high society life, wearing finery, supporting their lovers, but dared not ask their husbands for money. So they kept begging their father for cash to maintain their extravagance. That's why old Goriot became poorer and poorer after moving to the Vautrin boarding house. Every time he hosted his daughters at the apartment, it meant they were there to ask for money. Rastignac also uncovered a key piece of info. Madame de Beauseant told him that old Goriot's younger daughter, though married to a rich banker, was never accepted by aristocratic circles due to her low birth and was always looked down on by her noble married sister. Take Madame de Beauseant's ball, for instance. Rastignac, as a poor student and distant relative, could attend. Old Goriot's eldest daughter, as a noblewoman, could attend. But old Goriot's younger daughter, despite being a banker's wife, couldn't get an invite and could only yearn from afar. For Rastignac, eager to rise in Paris, this was a golden opportunity. He could use his noble relative status to introduce old Goriot's younger daughter to Madame de Beauseant's ball, perhaps win her favor and become her lover. Rastignac planned to, as her lover, help old Goriot's younger daughter extract more money from her husband and take a cut for himself. Then use that money as leverage to establish himself in Parisian high society. Since Rastignac already has noble relatives, why on earth does he need money? Because in Paris, money is essential for nobles to maintain a decent social life. On his first visit to a noble mansion, old Goriot's eldest daughter's place, Rastignac was publicly mocked by the doorman for not having money to hire a carriage. Later, he gritted his teeth and hired a carriage to go to Madame de Beauseant's house. But because the carriage wasn't fancy enough, he was still treated coldly by the doorman, making Rastignac realize that without money, he couldn't get anywhere in the noble world. So he secretly decided to become a rich lady's lover. Back then, it was almost fashionable for upper-class ladies in Paris to have lovers. But these romantic affairs pursued outside marriage were essentially tangled up with money, too. Old Goriot's eldest daughter had a handsome young lover. The man was a gambler who was only with her to swindle her fortune, ultimately driving her to bankruptcy and forcing her to sell her cherished diamonds. Madame de Beauseant's lover came from a noble family, a prestigious marquis, that at the start of the story, this esteemed marquis was considering abandoning his sworn love for Madame de Beauseant to marry a banker's daughter for her dowry of 200,000 francs. So you see, in Parisian high society, both marriage and love were tied to money. No wonder Rastignac set his sights on becoming old Goriot's younger daughter's lover, eyeing that banker's fortune. To attract old Goriot's younger daughter, Rastignac first needed decent clothes, but he couldn't even afford a proper suit, so he had to beg his already struggling family for money. In the novel, Rastignac says this money is a matter of life and death. So he wrote heartfelt letters to his mother and sisters, begging them to sell their treasured possessions to raise cash for him, and later received their replies and remittances. Afterward, Rastignac felt both heartache for his family and joy at getting the money, shedding many conflicted tears. Rastignac needed the seed money to break into high society, so he traded family affection for cash. In contrast, old Goriot used money to buy his daughter's shallow affection. Old Goriot came from a lowly background, had no education, and made his fortune early on in the flower business by riding the wave of early capitalism. He was meticulous when doing business. He studied market trends, researched legislation, exploited legal loopholes for profit, learned to predict harvests, bought grain cheaply from abroad, and hoarded food supplies. But outside business, he had no hobbies, no theater, no cards, no reading, no culture. All his energy went into making money. He didn't even know how to spend it. Before retiring, he earned 60,000 francs annually, but spent less than 1,200 on himself. The rest spoiled his daughters. In educating his daughters, old Goriot had only one method: throwing money at them. He hired the best tutors, had them learn horseback riding, provided private carriages, let them marry whomever they fancied, and split his fortune, keeping only his pension as their dowries. And old Goriot would be overjoyed just hearing his daughters call him Papa, or getting an occasional affectionate gesture, feeling he'd earned their love. Ultimately, everything was measured in money. Their father-daughter bond was bought penny by penny, so naturally they treated him like an ATM. After marriage, old Goriot's daughters only visited when desperate for cash, almost never inviting him to their homes. Usually they left him alone in that shabby apartment, silently enduring hardship without a care. Despite this toxic relationship, old Goriot reveled in it. He told everyone his daughters loved him, insisting living alone at Vautrin boarding house was his choice. He even felt guilty toward his daughters, regretting putting leftover money into his pension, leaving them without emergency funds. His longing for his daughters was impossible to hide. When hearing Rastignac met his younger daughter, he even reached out to touch him, as if touching Rastignac meant indirectly touching his daughter. Old Goriot refused to admit his daughter's indifference because deep down, he knew their bond was transactional. As long as he had money and they needed it, he'd keep their affection. So whenever his daughters showed up weeping over money troubles, he'd actually light up, full of energy. On his deathbed, old Goriot cried out, "Money can buy everything, even daughters!" Finally, he confessed his true belief and revealed the reality of their father-daughter relationship. Dying, old Goriot cursed his daughters. "Their children will avenge me," a prophecy that family bonds would be wholly replaced by money. Ah! Monetary relationships didn't just replace family ties, they corroded love too. Rastignac pursued old Goriot's younger daughter purely for money. Their bond was forged by cash. Money did. At each meeting, Rastignac showered her with sweet talk to prove his devotion. But old Goriot's younger daughter stayed sullen. Her husband cut her funds, leaving just 100 francs, so she'd soon lose her carriage and theater box. She even considered suicide over losing her lavish lifestyle. In despair, she gave Rastignac her last 100 francs for roulette. Clueless, he bet, and miraculously won 7,000 francs. solving her crisis. That gambling win sparked their romance and united them. Later, Rastignac invited her to Madame de Beauxant's ball, feeding her vanity and deepening their bond. But just as Rastignac succeeded with her, his mentor, Madame de Beauxant, suffered a crushing blow. At the ball, Rastignac learned her lover had formerly engaged a banker's daughter. Choosing money over love, he abandoned her. Humiliated, Madame de Beauxant resolved to leave Paris. Family and love both defeated by money, humanity's conscience crumbled as Rastignac clung to old Goriot's younger daughter while his plan flourished. Vautrin, the middle-aged businessman on the third floor, made him a more tempting offer. Vautrin was shrewd and capable, with a somber face, piercing eyes, and deep worldly experience. He knew everything in the Vautrin boarding house, including old Goriot's ties to his daughters. Vautrin had seen through Rastignac's plan to pursue old Goriot's younger daughter. He also noticed the young lady on the second floor had developed feelings for Rastignac. Her father was a wealthy banker, but he refused to acknowledge her as his daughter, denied her inheritance, and planned to leave everything to his son. Vautrin devised a plan: kill her brother to make her the sole heir. Vautrin told Rastignac he'd handle the killing, while Rastignac married her. After success, Rastignac would give Vautrin 1/5 of the inheritance as payment. Persuading Rastignac, Vautrin launched into an impassioned speech about his murderous scheme. First, he analyzed Rastignac's honest path: 5,000 francs annually by age 30. By 40, competing with 20,000 rivals for 20 chief prosecutor roles. By 50, max 50,000 francs. But nationwide, fewer than 5 achieved that. After marriage, his wife's new clothes alone would cost 10,000 French francs yearly, plus a hefty dowry for his daughter's marriage. In short, conventional effort offered almost no hope of rising to the top. Vautrin then exposed Rastignac's ambition, targeting his weakness, urging him to shed morals and laws. To succeed, Vautrin declared, "Scoop the grease without fearing dirty hands, just wash them later." Money overrides law and morality, even rewrites history. After murder and arson for wealth, money can later make you a great man again. Rastignac was horrified, but found Vautrin's logic persuasive, feeling deeply tempted. Vautrin's plan promised more money and saved time. Facing this temptation, he wrestled internally. While Rastignac hesitated, Vautrin killed the brother, drawing police attention. Turns out Vautrin's nickname was Trompe la Mort, Death Dodger, a major fugitive hunted by police for years. He was a big shot in France's underworld, master of disguise, ruthless, yet fiercely loyal to his criminal associates. Criminals looked to him as their leader. Ambitious, Vautrin wanted to master money, but ironically, his money chase ended in defeat by money. Another poor tenant at Vautrin boarding house betrayed him to police spies for just 3,000 francs. When arrested, Vautrin showed no remorse. He surrendered calmly, even telling his betrayer, "Had you warned me instead, you'd have gotten twice as much." Vautrin abandoned conscience for money, yet ultimately fell to money's power. Money strangles fate and crushes humanity's hope to reclaim dignity. As old Goriot's story concludes, every emotion and dream built on money collapses completely. After Vautrin's arrest, Rastignac stayed with old Goriot's younger daughter. He won her affection, and through his sympathy for old Goriot, earned the old man's approval too. Old Goriot scraped together his last coins to rent them an apartment. Rastignac even convinced the daughter to let old Goriot live with them, seemingly a happy ending until crisis struck. The elder daughter bankrupted herself supporting a lover, got beaten by her husband, and was placed under house arrest. The younger daughter, after a total marital breakdown, had her funds cut off by her husband. Poverty loomed, suffocating old Goriot. Drained by his daughters, old Goriot seriously considered theft, robbery, even bank heists. He dreamed of restarting his flower business, but nearing 70, he was powerless. Stress triggered a sudden collapse. His daughters refused to care for him, leaving Rastignac and a medical student to tend him at Vautrin boarding house. His condition rapidly worsened into delirium. He longed for his daughters, cursed himself, then cursed them. Yet with his dying breath, he forgave his daughters and blessed them. Neither made it to his deathbed or funeral. At the funeral, mourners sighed. Hopeless as he was, he remained human. This epitaph became his redemption. His whole life was spent earning money to build a family and buy his daughter's love. Dying penniless, he could no longer purchase their affection. Yet he still forgave them. Pure fatherly love without calculation, the story's first genuine human emotion. Finally, Rastignac buried his last youthful tear and went to dine at the younger daughters. Old Goriot's death meant nothing. Though this story ends, Rastignac's battle in Paris' money-driven society was just beginning. In old Goriot's tale, he was still an innocent youth fresh from the provinces. When begging family for money, he'd toss and turn, crying for nights. But reappearing elsewhere in the human comedy, he's Parisian elite and influential and cunning, a ruthless schemer. He conspired with Nucingen, the banker husband, to stage a fake bankruptcy, ruining thousands. Later, becoming a minister, he married Nucingen's daughter, turning his first love into his mother-in-law. Without old Goriot's story, we'd never imagine this cruel aristocrat was once a conscience-stricken youth. Rastignac, Vautrin, Nucingen all reappear across Balzac's novels. This recurring character technique defines the human comedy. Beyond this technique, Balzac's environmental details in Old Goriot amplify character traits through atmospheric contrast. For example, Madame Vautrin is a greedy and miserly widow. To highlight her character, the novel first uses a lengthy passage to describe the Vautrin boarding house in detail. The greasy wallpaper hasn't changed in 40 years. The fireplace has no ash, meaning she never lights fires for the tenants. Moreover, even the fruit on the garden trees is small and covered in dust, and especially the apartment has an indescribable foul smell that everyone calls boarding house smell. Musty, sour, greasy, mixed with the smell of leftover food and colds, making one shiver and feel nauseous. But when Madame Vautrin appears, Balzac says she doesn't feel uncomfortable at all, smelling the warm stench, instantly linking the decay and corruption of the boarding house's poor environment to her. The apartment hints at her stinginess. Yet old Goriot always seems out of place in his surroundings. When he first moved into the Vautrin boarding house, he brought gold and silver items like chains and cups, which clashed with the rundown place. When he appeared at his noble daughter-in-law's home, he looked shabby and rustic, completely unable to fit into the aristocratic environment, forever an outsider. Balzac also arranges for old Goriot and money to form a close relationship, like life and death. The state of old Goriot being alienated by money is revealed layer by layer in the novel. When he first appears, he's wealthy, owning 18 fine Dutch linen shirts, a thick gold chain, and a snuff-taking habit. His snuff box is also gold, and he looks very spirited. At 62, he looks under 40, and people respectfully call him Monsieur Goriot. All this is the facade money gives him. But soon this illusion built on money shatters. Old Goriot moves from downstairs to upstairs in the Vautrin boarding house, wears coarse clothes, sells his gold chain, quits snuff, looks ashen-faced like he's 70, and people realize he's poor and start calling him. The change in old Goriot's title from rich to poor suggests that human existence is tightly bound to money. Why did old Goriot suddenly become poor? This mystery drives the unfolding of the novel's story. Rastignac, as the one unraveling this mystery, threads the novel's plot together. Through his eyes, we witness old Goriot being drained by his daughters and see how his longing for kinship relies solely on money's fragile bond. For old Goriot, his daughter's affection was his entire life. Money could buy family love. So his entire existence was built upon wealth. His vitality perfectly synchronized with his finances until the very end. When old Goriot had not a penny left, he burned out like a spent candle, rushing toward death. Through old Goriot, we see money doesn't just affect quality of life, it reshapes human relationships and redefines life's value itself. Old Goriot has far less screen time than Rastignac. So why did Balzac name the book after him? Because compared to Rastignac the Observer, old Goriot is the character most thoroughly dehumanized by money. Thus, he best embodies the novel's central theme. Analyzing each character's tragedy, we find their downfall stems not from money itself, but inner desires, like Rastignac's lust for status, old Goriot's craving for familial love, Vautrin's hunger for power, and Madame de Beauseant's yearning for romance became their fatal flaws, letting money seize absolute control. All right, that concludes our interpretation of Old Goriot. Reading notes are below the audio. See you tomorrow?